My name is Jessica West, and I am a human wildlife conflict specialist for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. What I'm hoping to go over this evening with folks is a little bit of first coyote biology, then moving into a little bit of how we as the department and other municipalities, members of the public might manage coyotes, and then also preventing conflict as well, which is really what I hope everyone is most interested in learning about this evening. So before we begin, I do just want to provide a very quick acknowledgement. We do recognize that human-wildlife conflict is complex, contextual, it's complicated to say for sure. Attitudes, values, perception, tolerance of wildlife is going to vary widely. But we also recognize that community knowledge, identities, traditions, these are all interconnected with our natural resources. So really, we as the department, we began just this last year, actually in 2022, our Human Wildlife Conflicts Program, which is who I am associated with through the department. And really, the department recognized this need to try to address conflict proactively versus reactively whenever possible. So moving on now to coyote biology. First, we need to know a little bit more about the species before we can understand why they're managed a particular way and what kinds of conflict are really common with this species. Although I'm assuming most folks are pretty familiar with coyotes. Coyotes, typically you're going to identify them by that long, narrow snout. They do very commonly have a black tipped tail, usually kind of rusty brown, gray, but they are occasionally still misidentified as dogs or vice versa. Adult weight, believe it or not, they're only about 18 to 35 pounds. They actually look a lot bigger than they typically are. Home range for these guys is going to vary quite a bit depending on habitat, but really it's only about 1 to 15 square miles. And they do occupy every single type of habitat throughout California. That includes our deserts, our oceans, well, not the oceans themselves, but, but the coastline, forests, urban areas, you name it, there are coyotes there. Diet, so believe it or not, they're actually omnivores, which means that they are eating both meat and plants. Most of the time we think about them as meat eaters, but actually there was some recent research, that was done in the Santa Monica Mountains by the National Park Service that actually noted that coyotes eat quite a bit of plant material, including figs and other exotic fruits from our trees that we plant. Social behavior, they're going to typically travel in packs, about 2 to 10 individuals, sometimes just as a mated pair, or sometimes they might honestly just be a sort of lone individual. Population estimates. So this is quite a range, but we think somewhere between about 250,000 to 750,000. All this to say, in California, they are doing just fine. And lifespan is about 6 to 10 years when it comes to our wild coyotes, if they're lucky to get past puphood, as it were. And so I wanted to just kind of talk a little bit about differences between rural and suburban coyotes. So rural coyotes, they're going to be active a little bit more often at dawn, dusk, and nighttime. And in urban and suburban areas, you can actually see them pretty much at any time of day. And, honestly, even in rural areas, they can still be active during the daytime. But in urban, suburban areas, it's not uncommon, to see them in the middle of the day. So why the switch then? Basically, coyotes have learned through time just to be a little bit more tolerant of people. Some coyotes are going to be a little more tolerant than others. But also, really, our urban and suburban areas are providing such a plethora of food and water for these guys. And so for them, that risk is worth it, to be active during the daytime. They really don't see it as much of a concern, being awake when humans are awake oftentimes. And also, it provides protection from larger predators. So mountain lions actually will frequently take coyotes. And so will the occasional black bear, but really it's more so for mountain lions. So there's that benefit of being active during the daytime. Maybe not as much in our suburban areas where lions aren't as typically observed, but really, coyotes are typically trying to avoid us. Even during the daytime, they might still be active. They might be a little bit more tolerant, but they really don't want anything to do with us directly. They are going to retain that natural aversion to people until they might begin to associate people with food. And so we'll go into that into detail in a little bit. So jumping now into coyote management. So again, how we as the department manage coyotes, and more so how municipalities and other individuals might also manage coyotes. So we commonly refer to coyotes that are having some kind of issue with a human as a quote conflict coyote. Basically, this is a coyote that's going to require some kind of action, either again by city officials, by us as the department, or pretty commonly the public, due to whatever behavior or situation that coyote is in. This can include just sightings, general nuisance, so coyotes kind of showing up in yards, not really causing any damage, but just sort of being there. Depredation, that's when we get a little bit more serious, right? That's when we hear about, sadly, pets, outdoor cats, off-leash dogs, or dogs left out overnight being attacked by coyotes. And then our much more rare sort of conflict coyote, which is public safety. Basically, this is a coyote that's made some kind of physical contact with a human. And really, that type of conflict is going to influence the management response. So I wanted to just kind of briefly talk about lethal removal because that is a really common question. So coyotes, they are considered a non-game species in California. So what that means is there's no permit that's required from the department for those residents or municipalities that choose to do this, what we would call selective trapping and euthanizing of coyotes. And this is most going to commonly occur when either a coyote is sick or it's deemed an immediate danger to the public. Perhaps, again, there's been some kind of verified attack on a human, or, a licensed trapper is then hired and approved by a community to humanely trap and remove coyotes. And I just wanted to, kind of explain why, lethal removal is definitely a tool in the tool belt. But as far as, trying to, let's say, completely wipe out coyotes as a species, it's really not a long-term effective solution. It really doesn't decrease their population, it actually increases. Studies have shown that females will actually go into estrus sooner if there's sort of a void, basically, that coyotes will fill if other coyotes are removed from an area. So really, it's going to be food, competitors, space that's going to be regulating coyote populations and not humans. We tried this, right, in the 1800s, early 1900s to eradicate coyotes, but we've since realized, they are doing just fine, and if not, even better now. And I did just want to point out, too, that, they are a native species. They actually do help regulate rabbit and rodent populations. And research has shown, too, that where you have coyotes, you actually have greater songbird density, simply because coyotes are going to be also kind of regulating what we would call mesocarnivore populations. So things like raccoons, cats in certain cases, but animals that might be eating songbird eggs. So where you have coyotes there, you're actually going to have more songbirds. Okay, so hopefully I'm still doing okay on time. Preventing conflicts, the reason I hope that most people are here and interested this evening. So first and foremost, when it comes to coyotes, never feed wildlife, right? Whether that's intentionally or unintentionally. Unfortunately, when this occurs, right, I kind of alluded to it earlier, coyotes are going to lose that natural fear, right? That boundary now is sort of broken. They might not see you, as a food source, as a human, but they might view people as a provider of food. And so this is never a good idea. It's also against the law. So here in LA County, there actually is an ordinance that prohibits what's called here non-domesticated mammalian predator. So that does, you can see here in section B2, mammalian predators includes coyote, raccoon, fox, and opossum. So it's a big deal. And again, the consequences of feeding wildlife, right? So that animal now is what we would call, or it's becoming habituated, right? So that animal's going to now show little to no obvious reaction to people as a result of being repeatedly exposed to human stimuli without negative consequence. That's kind of a mouthful, but basically what that means is these coyotes don't have a negative association with people. If anything, it's positive because they have since received food rewards. So they do become what's called, quote, conditioned to human activity. And conditioning of coyotes can now lead, coyotes to have an increased proximity tolerance towards people. You might increase that risky behavior of coyotes actually approaching people. And then there subsequently is going to be that increase in potential for conflict and bites. And really, the majority of bites that have occurred on humans, those coyotes were being fed. And hazing, we often joke that scaring is caring, but quite literally this means trying to frighten off a coyote, quite literally, whether that's using deterrents or scary noises, movements. The idea is that you're trying to provide this education, right, to the coyote. You're reteaching them that, being around people actually isn't a great idea. I do want to note that we certainly would not want to encourage anyone to try to haze an injured or sick coyote, simply because they might act more defensively in that situation, or also because if it's a coyote that's with its young or near a den, again, more defensive in those situations. And so, it's not always appropriate too, but we definitely encourage, if you see a coyote in an area that it otherwise should not be in, feel free, get loud, tell that coyote, hey, get out of here. You can throw small objects towards the animal, make lots of noise. Again, the idea is just really trying to teach them that what they're doing isn't going to be tolerated. But the good news is there are already steps that we can take around our homes, our communities to try to prevent coyotes from being attracted there in the first place. One of those is by, doing a yard audit. Look in your garden, cut back some of that thick vegetation that might be creating hiding places or shelter. If you have compost bins, make sure those are secure and that we're harvesting all of that ripe or fallen fruit and vegetables quickly. And then a little bit easier said than done, but really trying to discourage some of those prey animals from your yards, right? So the squirrels, rats, gophers, if they're consuming fallen bird seed, that could be attracting the prey animals, which could then be attracting the coyotes. Trash wise, making sure we're picking up after ourselves, keeping those lids closed, and make sure also trying to keep that garbage inside a garage or some other kind of secure building until pickup day. Just really trying to prevent access to that trash is going to be key. Protecting pets. So this is definitely on the forefront of a lot of folks' minds. We do unfortunately hear about quite often coyotes interacting with small dogs or with cats. So really, we recommend keeping those pets indoors, right, when they can't be closely monitored outdoors. Bring in those dogs after dark. If you can't, try to keep them instead in secure kennels. We recommend always walking your dog on leash. And then when you do, keep them close, right? So no more than about 6 feet away is what we recommend. Really trying to avoid those extendable leashes just because you're going to have a little bit less control, in a situation if there was a coyote and a dog, if your dog was further than 6 feet away from you. Avoid walking pets at night, but if you do, bring a flashlight, use lights, feed cats and dogs indoors, right? Because oftentimes that food for your cat or dog might also be attracting the coyote. And you might even consider installing fence exclusion devices. There's some products known as like coyote rollers, or even using armored vests. And you can see an example of that in the top left here. It might look a little bit silly, but you know what? It's a tool in the tool belt. And we've heard a lot of success with folks, at least there's no absolute guarantee that any of these deterrents will be 100% effective 100% of the time, but it can certainly buy you time. So again, just a tool in the tool belt to consider. Around the home, also consider modifying that landscape, right? So really just trying to remove possible hiding places, closing off crawl spaces under homes, porches, decks. Again, hiding places, but also potential denning locations for animals. Supervise your children and encourage group play when they're in yards. And you might even consider installing things like motion detecting lights, alarms, water sprinklers, or jets. Again, just really trying to do that sort of passive hazing, when you're not around, you can actually try to frighten off the coyotes. And then when you're around the neighborhood, recreate in groups, always a good idea to go out with friends and stay alert when you're actually out there. A lot of times folks don't even realize if they're on their phone or if they have their headphones in, they might be right next to a coyote and not even realize it. If you know about an active den, maybe try to avoid just using that path during pup rearing season, which we are approaching, by the way. I'm sorry, I have a slide about it, but I knew we were going to run a little short on time. Typically March through about August. That is when coyotes are going to be a little bit more defensive, right? Because they do have active dens with pups. So something to keep in mind. You might even consider also carrying a walking stick, a whistle. You can make a shaker can. You can just fill an old jar with pennies or rocks, really just trying to come up with some noisemakers so that if you do encounter a coyote, you can do that active hazing. So just my last slide here, my living with coyotes takeaways. If there's anything you get from this presentation, number one is really just to give them respect. Coyotes are intelligent, they're adaptable species, and they will continue to share the landscape with humans. take action. So, make those changes that we need to do to protect people, our property, our pets, and make sure we're not feeding those coyotes. And then, of course, just staying safe. Awareness really is the best prevention when it comes to all kinds of human wildlife conflict. So with that, I will leave this slide up here for just a moment. If anyone wants to take a screenshot, I do have some website information here, as well as some phone numbers, as well as my email. Feel free to contact me after if you have any questions or if you'd like to follow up with me offline. But with that, I thank you again so much for the opportunity to connect with you this evening, and I would be happy to take any questions.
So this is such an important topic because our neighborhood is having a problem with coyotes currently. And I've been in my house for 25 years. And really, this is the first year that it's really been in my face. And I'm wondering, are there more of it, more around these days? And they're very bold. My neighbor across the street has a small Maltipoo, and her back door is glass. And the coyote literally sits outside her door and stares inside of her house at her dog. And she's afraid, and I don't blame her. And I have big dogs, which are of course playing with their squeaky toys right now. And I still worry about it because they're sort of 50-pound dogs. What do I tell my neighbors? I'm on the neighborhood council and I represent this area, and they're very concerned. And not just the one who has a Maltipoo, another one has a lab, and there's a coyote that comes every morning, jumps over her little white picket fence, and is almost right at her front door when she opens it in the morning.
I would certainly be interested to know a little bit more about, how long exactly the activity has been going on. If it does seem like it's sort of escalating within the last couple of months, being that we are approaching pup rearing season and breeding season, it's not too uncommon for coyotes to be a little bit more, as you said, sort of brazen or maybe kind of showing up a little bit more, right? Look, maybe taking more of that risky behavior that I kind of mentioned in the presentation. But as far as, recommendations going forward, there's got to be a reason they're there, right? They're not typically coming out of, as you might say, the woods to try to, attack pets or show up in people's yards. They've got to be there because there's something attracting them there, whether that is food that's being, purposefully left out for them, or whether or not it's that sort of indirect, feeding or watering of coyotes that's occurring. But between, just doing those sort of yard audits, looking around the neighborhood and saying, what is it that might be causing them to show up, in this way? Is there a den nearby? Is there something going on? And then also really pushing with that hazing, as much as possible, and just really trying to show these coyotes, hey, if you show up in this yard, crazy people are going to yell at you. They're going to throw things at you. It's not worth it, to be in this area or this yard. So feel free, Lisa, if hopefully you got my email. If you'd like to follow up with me later, or if you'd like me to connect with your neighbor, directly, I'd be happy to do that as well. But hopefully that kind of answers your question. I know that was kind of a long-winded answer, but
I'll have both of them contact you because they live 5 blocks apart. And as I said, one has a small dog, one has a big dog. So it doesn't seem to matter on the size. So, and are there more coyotes these days than when I moved here 25 years ago?
It's hard for me to know for sure. There really hasn't been much in the way of research behind if coyote populations are increasing, at least particular in like the Sherman Oaks area. So I'm not sure, to be honest. But what I can say though is that coyotes are certainly doing well. It's very possible that they've been there all along, in the numbers that they were in, and now they've just sort of started making themselves a bit more noticeable. So.
And one quick more question, Jessica. My one neighbor enjoys his guns, and he said, well, you can shoot them. And I said, oh, well, I don't have a gun, so that wouldn't really work for me. But is that true? You can shoot them if they're on your property?
So my response to that would be, if you're in a rural setting where you did not have to worry or have, I should say, neighboring residences, that you could do. You could take that lethal action. However, within urban and suburban areas, local firearms ordinances would absolutely have to be followed. And I have to assume that in that area, you would not be able, or your neighbor would not be able to fire a weapon legally.
You'd mentioned that if coyotes get aggressive, towards people that they might be put down. How do you know which coyote? Are they tagged?
A great question. And, to be completely honest, you're right. You can never know for sure unless there's some kind of identifying marker. That's why, when we do talk about lethal management, that's very selective trapping, which is kind of easier said than done, right? Because you really don't know, right? Exactly which coyote is you're trapping, in those situations. I should say I'm not aware of any tagged or otherwise collared coyotes in that region. I know there had been previously in elsewhere in the Santa Monicas, but I'm not sure about your particular area. But yes, all that to say, you're right. You might not know, quite honestly.
Okay, I have a question. I have not experienced them being aggressive, the coyotes being aggressive, like what Lisa was talking about. I had heard on Nextdoor once where one came in a doggy door and actually got the dog out of the house. One thing that I wasn't sure about is one night when I was walking, I have a bigger dog and my dog is almost 90 pounds, which is considerably larger than the coyote. But I felt like I was being stalked because every time I would turn around, this dog was, behind me and it kept getting closer and I would stop and, yell at it to go away. And it just kept getting closer and closer. And it didn't really seem to be too concerned about the fact that I was trying to scare it away. In that situation, what is the best thing to do?
Yeah, definitely. And maybe I should just ask real fast as well. Did you say when about that happened? When that coyote was sort of following you?
Yeah, it was right like just as the sun was starting to set. It was like almost down, and I try to go before then. Mm-hmm. But once daylight savings, when it gets darker, sometimes that's not always possible. So it was starting to get dark.
Okay, but within the last week or so.
Oh no. This was several months ago. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You mean what time of the year? Yeah, it was.
Yeah, sorry.
Like so when we roll the clocks back, whenever that is, like September, back then.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. Yeah, and I always like to ask because I am sort of considering when, pup rearing season is or when it's about ending. And really that sort of typical ending is like August, sometimes leading into September. Because, well, maybe I should just sort of, based off what you're telling me, sort of explain what I think may have happened and then address, how you can respond in those situations. So to me, that sounds like one of two things. It was either viewing potentially your bigger dog as a threat or competitor. Sometimes coyotes will view larger dogs in that way. And it's just sort of, because they're so territorial, because they hold territories, they might view bigger dogs as such, as an intruder, essentially. Or it could have also been, we do hear about this during pup rearing season, coyotes will actually escort or sort of follow people if there's a den nearby. So they will sort of, like you said, shadow someone, and that is them basically trying to encourage you to leave, faster. So again, without having seen it exactly, it's hard for me to know for sure, but just kind of based off my knowledge and kind of thinking about the time of year, those are two possibilities. Now, if a coyote is approaching you, it's not backing down, you've tried hazing, you're yelling at it, it's not really leaving. First and foremost, I would say, and this is easier said than done, but don't run, just stop, and just start backing away slowly. If you do have a dog with you, trying to keep those bigger dogs behind you and trying to maintain control over them. Smaller dogs, you can try to pick them up, just kind of remove them from the situation as best as possible on your shoulder. But really, it's just about sort of, leaving that area. That again, if that coyote is escorting you, that might all be the only thing it wants, it's just you to leave. But just sort of removing yourself from the situation, backing away, that's the best thing to do. With hazing, I will say, we usually recommend that when folks haze that you just keep hazing until that coyote leaves. Sometimes coyotes might not realize, what's going on. They might be curious. They might be a young coyote and they've never been hazed before, and they're just sort of figuring things out. Yeah.
Can you clarify hazing again?
Oh, sure. So hazing is essentially scaring, right? So trying to get big. Exactly. Christy just got big, loud, scary, throwing things towards the animal. It's just really trying to reinforce that, hey, I'm a big scary human, you want nothing to do with me, sort of thing. which sounds like you were doing, as far as yelling and trying to make noise. But just keep up with it, because sometimes those coyotes really might just not know what to do, or they might even be a little bit nervous to leave because they don't want to turn their back to you. You're a big scary human, you're making lots of noise, and they're even a little bit then afraid to leave in that situation. So I guess what I'm saying is, Susan, and I'm sorry, it's very situational. But my recommendation is, just keep up with that hazing, and just trying to remove yourself from that situation, especially if it doesn't seem like coyotes backing down. Just getting yourself out of there into safety, is number one.
In order to prevent rodents from coming on your property, sometimes like raccoons, you can put one of the deterrents is coyote urine, or there's urine that they put down. Is there any sort of is there any sort of a spray or something like that deters them? And that might also help Lisa's neighbors as well. If there is something like that you can put down that actually repels them, then maybe that would be helpful too. Is there anything like that for the coyotes?
That is a great question. And unfortunately, there really hasn't been a lot of research into scent deterrence. Really, the only thing that I'm really aware of that works more so for bears, not so much for coyotes. Just again, there really hasn't been a lot of research. It's things like ammonia, works for bears, but coyotes, to kind of speak also to the wolf urine, which I believe you had said, or was it coyote urine? Sorry, some kind of urine.
Yeah, I'm not even sure. I think it's coyote urine, but I wouldn't swear to it.
Okay, no worries. I was going to say, I know some people who swear by it, who say that it keeps rodents and other coyotes away. But I also think it's important to consider that coyotes, again, are very territorial. And so if you're now placing urine or some other kind of interesting or odd smell, it might actually be more of an attractant than anything. So like I think I mentioned in my presentation, no deterrent is going to be 100% effective 100% of the time. It just kind of depends on the individual. So unfortunately, not a lot of research as far as scent deterrence, but definitely like tactile deterrents, things like the coyote rollers, and again, those Kevlar vests that, for dogs, those are all deterrents that have been sort of tested with coyotes and have been shown to be fairly effective.
Right. So I just have one question. Is there any kind of assistance to have any of these situations, I guess, with the coyotes or the ducks or raccoons or any of these removed from a residence if they are, let's say, get into a crawl space or anything like that, and then they happen, or in a tree or something, and then they're living there? Is there any kind of assistance, or what do people do if this is their situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for those sort of what we consider non-game species, like the coyotes, raccoons, skunks, opossums. So those are animals that you would probably want to speak with animal control initially. So we as the department are going to be managing more like the bears, the mountain lions, the deer. But for coyotes and other animals like that, I would recommend connecting with animal control first.
And thank you so much for your presentation. It was great. I really enjoyed it. I think it was very informative. You answered a lot of questions. I'm really hopeful that Lisa's neighbors can find something so that they don't have to actually hurt them. But again, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here. I thought it was a great presentation, and I enjoyed it. I hope everyone else did too. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome, folks. And again, feel free to reach out at any time. We can help you out as much as possible with any wildlife questions. So thank you very much for your time.